So for this meeting, we're focusing on this topic of how to one, promote, but also how to communicate your events, right? So between Michael and myself, Michael works with a lot of churches, and so do I. And for anybody that's listening that doesn't know, we partnered together to create this resource called Canva for Churches. Within just a few months, we've seen over 2,000 people, 2,000 churches really go through it and use it. And we're just putting out these resources to continue to help churches communicate better, right? When we improve our communication as ministries, what happens is we help serve our people better, right? So our goal is to help your church engage your city, empower your ministry, and overall equip your team. But so there can be a lot that can be said with that. But in order for us to get those outcomes, we have to first understand why do we communicate and how do we communicate. So our last conversation, we briefly talked about the why we communicate, but now we're going to talk about and we're going to cover exactly how do we communicate. So our three lanes of communication, and a lot of you, some of this stuff is going to feel elementary, but what happens when you write this stuff down, it really allows you to track like what your church is currently doing, right? And a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about, but sometimes, and I've been a communication director myself, so I know exactly how a week can feel like when you have 30 million requests. This person asks if you guys can do this on social media. Your pastor changed the sermon series for the third time that day, right? So I understand how it can be. So with these lanes of communication, it helps bring things back together and make sure the different areas of ministry or the different teams in your ministry are all communicating the same thing. I always talk about the Tower of Babel, right? How did God divide them up, right? He changed up their language. He changed up their communication. So if the people in our ministry, we are communicating differently, then there's no unison, right? We're not working together. So the three lanes of communication, as I define it, would be one, your in-person communication, right? So what happens, not online, but what happens through your cards, your promotional assets, your banners, your environments, right? Every single thing in your environments and in your church, and even with your team and the people who are serving, they are all communicating something, right? Before the pastor preaches a message, the people in the parking lot will be preaching a message. So it's this idea of going from the pulpit to going from the parking lot to the pulpit, right? To the pews. But so that's the first thing. It's like your in-person communication. What's happening on site? The second lane that we're going to talk about is what's being communicated from the stage, right? So now, again, it may sound very similar, but it's actually two different things. The first one focuses on everything that's happening from your environment to your team through the promotional handouts that you provide. And then the second one is what is actually coming out of the pastor's mouth directly, right? Or any person that is communicating on the stage. And then the third one is communicating online. So this, we talk about newsletter, we talk about social media, we talk about anything as it relates to your website or text messaging. So really, these are the three lanes of communication. And the way that we approach this when we talk about it is the first thing that you have to do is you have to ask yourself, whether it's if you're promoting an event like baptism, you have to look at these three lanes of communication and ask, are we all communicating the same thing? Are we all pushing people to the same place? Are we all in a line to like what's the main thing that we're communicating here, right? But now here's the challenge of communicating, right? A lot of times because we serve on teams, a lot of times because we have different people that are involved in this process, communication can sometimes be a little different. So that's why in this session, we're going to talk about this idea called the story brand framework. right? The story brand framework is a method to communicate overall, right? Do we still have Michael here on the call, or did he run out? Let me see. Okay, I think he's coming back on here. So it's this story brand framework. So the story brand framework is this idea that a character with a problem meets a guide with a plan, right? I'm going to say it one more time. This framework is a character with a problem meets a guide with a plan. So with this framework, we create this story. Michael, are you back on by chance?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Awesome. Yes. So right now we're talking about the story brand framework. We covered the different areas of communication. So we talked about the in-person communication through collateral, through team, but then we talked about the from the stage communication, and then we talked about the online communication. Now we're diving into this topic of um, how to first create a story brand framework, how to create a story framework for your ministry. Any thoughts on that, Michael?
Yeah. So another way to put it is creating a story loop. So I think the mistake that a lot of churches make is that we communicate what's going on, but we don't communicate it in a way where people actually care. And so
That's good.
the story loop allows us to position the announcement in a way that people say, "Oh, yeah, I actually that sounds good. Like I should be a part of that." Or if it's for them, they know it's for them. Or if it's not for them, they can think about, "Oh, that's for my cousin or that's for my neighbor." Like it's super super clear. So it starts off with this idea of a character. So who's the target audience, right? That's kind of a marketing thing. Who's this for? So I'll just use, for example, like I just did announcements at our church this past weekend. There was a youth event happening on a Wednesday night, like a teenagers gathering together. So who's it for? Well, it's for the parents and it's for the teens that might be in the room. So we want to, so that's who the messaging is for. And then what's the problem? So unpacking a problem that people are struggling with is the key to any like great like marketing communication. So the problem is, hey, you need some good people to hang out with, right? Or your kids need some good people to hang out with, some good influences, a good leader, those type of things. So we state the problem. So, hey, do you need some good people to hang out with? Or do you have some teenagers in your home that just need some good people, good influences in their life? I think, every parent would nod their head yes on that one. So then from there, you present the solution. Okay, so the solution is we have this event on Wednesday night. It's a small group gathering. Your kids should be there. So that's our solution, right? So the solution could also unpack a few details like, hey, we're going to have pizza, we're going to play some games, and we're also going to share some scripture. So that's the solution, right? We're just telling them what. That's the what. So again, most churches make the mistake of they just communicate the what. But if we open it up with a problem that everybody can say, oh man, yeah, I have that problem, then we provide the solution. Then we provide the result. Okay, so the results, that's what makes it the home run. So this idea that, hey, if your teenager comes out to this event on Wednesday night, they're going to make a connection that could last for the rest of their life. They're going to have some positive influences, some voices other than your voice that's going to be pointing them towards the things of God. Would you like that?
That's
Uh,
good.
so that's where we talk about, and you can also flip it to have negative results. You can also talk about that. That's also very motivational. So you might throw like a little one-liner in there, like if your kids don't come out to this event, they're going to be hanging out with the same group of friends, doing the same things. So a little bit of negative is also a good thing to throw in there. Now, I know an announcement is short. So if you just want to state the problem, state the solution, and state a result, then that's a really good way to open up a story loop to where people actually care about the announcement. And then the final piece to this, step number 5 in this process. By the way, I put a link in the chat. There's a PDF that we created with a like this framework, so you can have it. And it's also part of the Calm Academy. It's inside there, so you can have access to that as well. So step number 5 is a call to action. So we need to make sure we give them a next step. So for this particular event, it was just to basically show up on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock at the address. But we had a little QR code on the screen where they can, capture that information, and it's right there. So we can't forget the call to action. Like, we need them to have a clear, like, one thing. What's the one thing they need to do to then actually participate in this event? So again, those 5 parts: who's the character, what's their problem, what's our solution, what's the result, and then what's the call to action.
Yeah, that's really good. And my favorite thing about this framework is it's a framework, right? Meaning that this is something that you can use in multiple areas, right? So we talked about online, we talked about from the stage, we talked about um, on social media. And right now, we talk a lot about social media and the rise of video and everything that's happening. This framework right here is a good framework whenever you're creating any type of social media, video, reel content, right? When I think about communication as a whole, um, when we talk about communication, the goal of communication is first we want to be clear, right? So the fact that we're stating the problem right from the start, it's making it very clear um, what we're about to get into, right?
Hey,
And
Dennis,
yeah,
I
go ahead.
just got a question for you. You
Mhm.
mentioned Reels. What is, do you use Reels for announcing things like a student gathering?
Yeah. So right now, when I consult any church, what I'm telling everybody right now is to jump into video, right? And the opportunity for video right now is that it does not need to be this high produced piece of content. In fact, right now on video, the more produced the video is, it chances are people are going to skip over it, right? Right now, people just want to see a face holding a camera, and they just want you to be clear, and they want you to be concise, and they want you to have a clear call to action. So as it relates to social media, using this framework is actually the same framework that I teach on how do you create reels, right? So the first thing is when you create a good reel is you need a hook. So the hook can be that question. Hey, does your kid need somewhere to go this summer? Are you tired of having them in the house? Right? So that's the hook. And anybody that says yes to that hook is going to watch the video. They're not going to skip over the video. And then once you provide the content, then from that content, you can have a clear call to action. So this is a great framework to put in your social media. So to answer your question, Michael, yes, I would say do that promotion as a reel. Um, the more reels that your church can post right now, the better it will be for you. Because the more consistent you get on these platforms, the more these platforms reward you. And that results in more people seeing your content, more people engaging with your ministry online. And then that also creates a better experience for those people that want to come to your church, but first they're going to go find you online.
Yeah, just to add to the digital mix of communication, we like to think about the website as being primarily for the first time guest. So we don't want to put too much on there that's insider information. Now, I will say that it is helpful to have like an events page or something like that where you can post all the events that are going on. That is helpful to everybody, even first time guests. But when it comes to like announcing, smaller events and different things like that, I know that's kind of a thing that churches juggle all the time. How much do we announce and how much do we put up there? I do think there's opportunities for email lists to be formed where you're announcing things that are specific to groups just based on like who's in the group. If it's a smaller group, it's also like text message groups is good. If you can get people onto a system like Slack where you can Slack people, that's also a good thing. Like if it's a small group type of thing where, so at our church, we don't have a big youth group. We just have a small groups that is, it's the girls teenage small group or the boys teenage small group, and they all just kind of text each other about what's going on. So the pressure isn't there to announce it from the stage all the time. So you can use other digital forms of communication to then get the word out. The app is also something, if the church has an app, That's a good place to announce like all the smaller events that are going on, where there's like maybe an events tab of some kind to where people can grab the information.
And a good way to think about the content and why I would encourage everybody to go use that PDF is one, and it could feel a little elementary, but once you put that specific event that you're trying to promote through that framework, what happens is now you have a framework for the communication, and then you just have to decide, okay, where are we going to distribute this, right? So after you have that sheet, you don't have to think, oh, well, we have a social media post, or will we have, no, it's, this is the one sheet. From the sheet you just decide where are we gonna communicate um this item, right? And again, I would say make it, the first thing is just make it clear. So like make anything that you do, anything that you communicate, it just needs to be clear. If it's going to go online or if it's going to go on digital, it needs to be concise, right? And then third, it just needs to be consistent. So first, it's just make sure it's clear, um, make sure it's concise as it relates to online and digital, and then make sure that it's consistent.
So
So
I think
it's
Elizabeth had a question. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
yeah.
Yeah, I do have a question. So after you use this framework to come up with the messaging, so then I assume, right, you use the same messaging everywhere in every channel that you use to communicate it. So then my question would be, like, for example, if we have an event that we're promoting, we've taken it through this framework, we know exactly what the problem, solution, the result, call to action is, but we announce it 2 weeks in a row. Does it get boring to announce the same thing 2 weeks in a row? Should we change it up? Should we keep the same framework? What does that look like?
Yeah, great question. So what you can do is choose a different problem. So same framework, choose a different. So one might be, people, your teenager needs friends, but then the second problem is your teenager needs God's word in their life, to straighten them out, whatever that is. So just change the problem, and then it automatically changes the rest of it. And also with Dennis's point, like you can have the long version, like write out. What we typically do is like we write out like the script, but then we have the short version that is like, punchy for social media. So we have different lengths of the same promotion.
So for example, if we're thinking about promoting, I don't know what, but let's use this youth group example. They're starting to meet together on Wednesday night. So we may come up with maybe 4 problems that this thing is going to solve. So we take it through the framework 4 different times, and then we kind of flux between those 4 different things, right? So we just make sure that each of those 4 things at one point is put out on social media. We make sure that each of those 4 things is at one point communicated from the stage. Is that right? Is that the way to think about that?
Yeah, you nailed it. So
Yeah,
in
that's correct.
marketing world, yeah, in marketing world, that's exactly what we do to sell a product. It's like the product has, all these different benefits, but we might create like one email campaign for this benefit, another email campaign for this benefit, another, campaign for that benefit. So you're just doing the same thing. Yeah, you're just swapping it out. So let's jump into the in person. This one kind of flows into the digital a little bit. So in person, we're talking about signage, screens on the property, and then also we're talking about just informing people, leaders, volunteers, people that are at the campus itself about what's going on. So typically, we just want to have. Let me start with the last one. Inform the leadership. Inform your serve team, your dream team, your go team, whatever you call it. Make sure they're informed about what's going on, so that they can answer questions. At the very least, have them know where to go to get the answer to the question, right? So if somebody has a question, just be able to help them by at least getting them to the right place. Now, the second level to that is to have some signage on the property. Again, you can do posters. Like we find that to be very inexpensive to get some posters, put them on the walls, or put them into A-frame signs on the property to let people know, like, this is a big deal. This is what's going on right now. So the physical presence is a good thing when you're doing in person. And then also screens, like, we have screens in the lobby or screens in the auditorium. or maybe screens down the hallways. If we can, if that's wired to where you can be able to put that out there, or maybe you can just put a thumb drive in there and just kind of have that graphic up on that screen. We just want to communicate through all the avenues on the campus that this is the next big thing. Now, I will encourage, if you're a church that has a lot of events, that's tough. If you can have like one big thing at a time, that's ideal. I know a lot of churches aren't kind of, structured like that. But the more concise where you can communicate the one big thing that's coming up, the better. So maybe one week you're pushing one thing and the next week you're pushing something else. You're communicating all of it all the time, but maybe you're just really making a visual representation of one thing at a time. Dennis, anything else to add to the in-person?
Yeah, that's good. And with the in-person, I would say a lot of what you're going to hear us talk about is going in this seasonal model, right? So planning in seasons. And I think that's this topic is a great example of why we plan in seasons. We plan in seasons and we create these season kits for churches. So you can be thinking about all of these events that are going to be happening in advance. So when you create these, when you think about this stuff in advance, it gives you time to prepare. And I think that's one of the added bonuses of Calm Academy is that we're trying to think of these things in advance for you. So when they come up, you can just go on Calm Academy, get the kit that you need. And whether it's a small group or whether it's a youth night, you have these templates ready. And as it relates to the in-person experience, like Michael said, putting up posters or even purchasing like business cards, leveraging the templates we provide, it's a great way to create that invite culture. So if you're planning in a season, or a quarter, whatever you may call it, you know that within the season, here's everything that's going to take place within the season. Here's how we're going to use the story loop framework to communicate these things. Let's go on Calm Academy. Let's grab these designs and let's just add in different things that we're going to promote, and let's get these things printed for the in-person experience. So that's the approach that we're trying to help churches to take is, hey, let's plan this stuff in advance. And let's start creating an invite culture through your in-person. And the story loop framework comes in really well because one of the challenges of promoting events is coming up with the language that we're going to use to communicate this, right? So just said all of that to show you why this story loop framework is very important for you to start implementing tomorrow.
Yeah, it creates a cohesion too. Like when we're coming up with that story loop and we're creating the graphic, and it's the same graphic online that's in-house, it creates this cohesion. Like, oh, I can trust this. I can trust that this event is going to be great because it's trustworthy. Like there's a lot of things that make it trustworthy. So that's a big part of it too. Like that's a big part of branding. Like how do we create trust so people do take their next steps? That parent really does send their kid to that youth event because they really do believe that we're going to help their kid out. So that's a big part of it. And also that just reiterating, man, Dennis, you nailed it. Like you have to plan ahead to where you know months in advance, like this is going on, and then create a system. Like one of the things we want to help you do is create a system. So when we do posters, we talk about posters. It's typically the same size. It's 2 foot by 3 foot. The reason is that we can put that on a wall. We can also put it into a sign holder. There's sign holders that you can get for your property, whether it's the cheaper A-frame signs or maybe something that's a little bit more elegant, but they fit that size. So we want to create a systematic way to promote things. So you're not having to reinvent the wheel every single time. You just know, like, this is the playbook. This is how we do things. And that makes it a lot easier for you to communicate. Let's look at the final area from the stage. I know, Elizabeth, you were talking to me about the announcements a while back, so hopefully this is helpful. So we've been learning a lot about this too here at Vibrant Church and trying to implement it. We just went to this conference at Christ Fellowship, one of the most thriving churches in the country right now. They're doing a lot of good things. And so they actually talked about this, and they said they don't communicate from the stage on the weekend more than 2 things in their announcements. Like that's it. 2 things. That's all they. So the host comes up and they announced basically two. Now they also included, like, they might communicate three things because they want to like welcome the guests, and then they might want to tell you like two other things that's happening in the church. Okay, and that's it from the stage, and it's really really well communicated for either by the host, or there's a video that they play that communicates that idea really concisely. Now the other option is in through the sermon, like so the beginning of the sermon or the message, when the pastor gets up, they can also communicate maybe something else, but it's through their voice. So they're going to put some weight behind it, and they're going to communicate it before they get into their sermon. So you kind of get, in a way, you get three things, right? You can communicate three things.
That's good.
So Pastor Chris Hodges, again, one of the leading pastors out there right now that's doing things in the church world, he says that if you're not willing to preach an announcement, then does it really need to be communicated? So he's just saying basically, you should be announcing from the stage things that are really important to the people in the congregation, that's really going to serve them. And then so he spends, I mean, if you watch any of his messages online, the first like 3 to 4 minutes is like him like really pushing something that's important within the church. And then he gets into the message. So that's kind of a rule of thumb from the stage. And I know it might take a minute to get to that point. We also have to keep in mind, what other avenues of communication do we have at our fingertips to be able to communicate those smaller events that still do need to be, sent out there. One of the things that we've implemented, we learned this from Life.Church. They communicate through small group leaders a lot. So those small group leaders have a list. They have text messages and those type of things. So they try to push information through those small group leaders. They use an email list. And if your email is good, like if it's not considered junk, then people actually do open it and they read it and they see what's going on. It's serving them. There's Christ Fellowship. They actually talked about how in their emails they'll put like a recipe of the month or some other kind of fun things in there to just kind of change it up and make it so people are engaging with it. I guess, Dennis, let me kick it over to you. And then if you have any questions, Elizabeth, if you have any questions, feel free to, I know you had a bunch earlier, so feel free to jump in there. Dennis, anything else to add?
Yeah, I think the key thing as it relates with communicating is, here's why we communicate. We're communicating, and I know we're talking about promoting events, right? But the main reasons why we promote, the main reason why we communicate is not just to promote or get people to do something, right? The goal of our communication needs to be to build a relationship with the in-person. And what we as ministries have to realize, and I'm guilty of this, is it's not just about getting the person to the next event. It's about creating a connection point for them. So, Michael, you talked about like if their email is good, right? You had that sentence, and it's like a lot of church emails can go to junk if you're just promoting the next thing, right? So, and this same principle applies to online. If you're making social media posts that's just telling people, come to small group, come to Sunday, watch this message, do this, do that, go here, go there. What's happening is this is a dictatorship. There's no real relationship, right? Now, that does not mean you still can't promote. It's just flipping the communication. So instead of saying, hey, we have groups this week, you can create a value added. And so now I'm giving a specific example as it relates to social media. So instead of saying, hey, we have groups this week, come join a group, it's using that story loop framework and says, hey, have you felt lonely this season? How do you feel like you're actually not really connected? Well, here's what the Bible says about this. You give the value add. In fact, if you're looking to get a part, if you're looking to be a part of some life-giving community, I want to invite you to visit this page, right? So we're still communicating the same thing. We're still communicating groups, but one is telling them, hey, go do this. And the other is saying, hey, we care about you. We want to share this with you, right? And this same in the companies that do that, the companies that understand this principle are the companies that actually do very well. So us as churches, we have the best gift to give. But if we're just trying to be salespeople and trying to get people to do things, then we're never going to be able to communicate that message clearly. So I say all that to say, if you're going to communicate anything, just first identify how can you build a relationship with the person on the other end, and how can you invite them into a story rather than just giving them things for them to do.
Elizabeth, anything to ask or even add? I know you've been playing with this.
Yeah, I think that's all exactly great. Like as I think about sometimes when our announcements aren't fantastic, it really does feel like just a list of more things that we have to do. And that's totally what we don't want to do to our church family. We don't want to burden them with, you need to come and do this, you should come and do this. So just thinking through creating this, I really love the idea of the result, like to lay it out for people, to let them know when you do this, this is going to be the outcome. And as I think about my own self scrolling through social media, I'm constantly looking for those things, like what problem is it that I have, what is this going to solve, what's a solution for me. So I think this is all spot on. I think it sounds great. It sounds like a lot of thinking through to figure out, okay, how do we think through what possible problems. But then I think it'll help to streamline our ministry too, to help us decide, are these events that we're having or doing worthwhile? It helps us ourselves to say, what's the goal of this? Why are we doing all of this? Is it just to have lots of groups, or is it just to have lots of events, or is there an actual purpose behind it? So I think it's great.
That's right. That's good.
Donald Miller, he's an author. He's also like a business guru type guy, and he talks about this a lot. And he actually highlights, like whenever he communicates these 5 things, he actually highlights it in different colors. And so he'll, like, if he's evaluating an email from one of his clients, he'll go through and he'll highlight based on each of these 5 areas. Like, so the goal is to basically to not communicate anything except these 5 things, and to communicate these 5 things within the email. So you get all 5 of them in there. And the way he says it is that if you can do this, you can sell anything. Like you'll sell $1 million worth of whatever. So it's a framework that you get used to. Once you start using it, like you actually start to think about it like this. You're thinking, you do it for about 15 times, and then all of a sudden, like you're just thinking how do I communicate this in a story loop, not just what is it that I need to communicate. One other thing, I just as you were talking, you can also insert testimonials. So that could also be a kind of a mix of the announcement of like, hey, let me tell you about Kyle. Kyle went to a small group, and they just surround, like he had this terrible thing happen, and then they really helped him out, and now Kyle is living a better story because of his group. So that communicates like everything, like that's like the home run, right? If we can.
That's right.
So as far as like mixing it up a little bit, a testimonial is also a really good one to throw in the mix. And then you put the call to action at the end of it. If you're like Kyle and you need some people around you, then you should come be a part of groups. All right. So Dennis, any final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thoughts is it's the same thing you guys are gonna hear me say every other week, right? It's always just reminding communication directors specifically, it's the importance of communication, right? The importance of being clear, the importance of being concise. And when we communicate effectively, what happens is we engage not just the people in our church, but we engage our city, right? I think one of the results that happen when we begin to communicate through a story loop is that people want to share it, right? So, because we're not telling them to do stuff anymore, we're inviting them into a story. And any time where there's a good story is always shared, right? So if you want to create an invite culture, tell good stories. If you want people to promote your church, tell good stories. If you want to build a welcoming and life-giving team, tell more stories and use the story loop framework to do that.
So my final thought with this is think systematically. So I was communication director a few different times at a couple different churches, some of them mega churches. One particular pastor was a very charismatic pastor, I guess you'd call it, and I loved serving him, but it was really hard to communicate because he was kind of, man, it was just kind of flowing with whatever's going on. It's like, hey, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this. So my challenge as a communications director was like, how do I create a system where we can still win? Like, as a church, as an organization, how can we still win? How can my pastor still flow in his giftings and I can still communicate what I need to communicate? And so the more systems that I have in place, the more I can grab the information, because the more fine-tuned my ears are at and my eyes are at seeing it. It's like, oh, so the problem is this, right? So I'm thinking about that. He's saying something completely inspirational, but I'm seeing the problem that he's solving, and I'm able to plug it into the framework. And then because I have systems in place of like, hey, we do posters, invites, social media posts, and screens. I know those are my big four. Well, all of a sudden, I can produce those four things pretty quick. And as a communications person, I've been there where I've stayed up at the church way too late at night trying to catch up on all the different things that need to be communicated. But what I learned is that, my heart was for the ministry and to communicate it. But if I use my brain a little bit, I can still serve the ministry well and not have to like sweat it quite as much. And what I found is that that dynamic leader that's very flowing, they respected that. Like, they honored it. They're like, they embraced it. They loved it. After I wasn't trying to like force them into that's one of the things, like this particularly, like, don't put me in a box. Like, God's not in a box. It's like, okay, I won't put you in a box. God's not in a box. I get it. How about a system?
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So
That's really good.
I'll wrap it up with that. Is there any final questions or thoughts or anything before we close it out? I do want to honor. Okay. All right. So just a couple quick reminders. We have some new kits in Comm Academy. Comm Academy is always growing. Check out the kits that are in there. Courses are coming this week. So check out courses. We're going to start small and keep on growing from there. That way we can train you up on things like Instagram Reels and things that are changing constantly, but
Right.
we can still keep you up to date on the latest techniques that are happening. And there'll also be some evergreen things like on the branding perspective, like, hey, what is a brand? How do we build a brand? What is a story loop? Like, that stuff just never changes. It's been used for thousands of years, but it'll be in there to where you can reference it and go back to it. So again, thanks for being part of Comm Academy. We're excited about where this is headed. Send your questions in. Like, you're going to help us produce the content that's going to be helpful to you. And because it's helpful to you, it's going to be helpful to everybody else that we serve. So feel free to email us with questions. Hop into Slack if you're not in there already, so we can communicate back and forth. And I think that's it as far as housekeeping stuff. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Dennis, any final, did I miss anything?
No, you covered it all.
All right. We also have a new, Elizabeth, just for you, like, we have a new platform that we're working on for Canva for churches. Have you checked out Canva for churches?
No,
Okay.
I haven't yet.
You need to. It's
that's
gonna
a
save you a
free-
ton of time.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the free one that we put together. Dennis has been working on that one. So it's a bunch of design templates on Canva, done on Canva, to where you can just grab them, and they're all for free. So anyway,
Okay.
check that out.
And so
All
are those different than the kits, or is that where the kits are?
They are different. So they're just screens. So they're like one graphic that's like a 1920 by 1080. But we have like 280 or almost 300 of them that are just like, you just grab them and then you'd have to resize them and you'd have to kind of repurpose them. And they're kind of random. So some of them are like sermons, some of them are like small groups. So they're a bit random. And then the kits are, the difference is that the kits are all kind of packaged up for you, and it has like marketing language and stuff kind of in there already. So they're not quite as put together as the kits are.
Okay, that's good to know. I do have another question about Calm Academy though. I don't know if this is part of it, but so right now I signed up for our church and I'm the one getting the emails. Can we put more than one email address in there? Because I have some other people that will also need to receive those emails.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're going to talk about as well through Calm Academy is we haven't mentioned it yet, but one of the key things we want to do is we want to help you identify somebody as well, right? We kind of hold this belief that if you're doing something, you should never be the only person that knows how to do it, right?
Mhm.
So if you leave or if you go somewhere else, then the church has to start at square one again, right? So that's why
Mhm.
we always encourage people to identify a person and then teach them how to go through these systems so that Calm Academy is an investment back into your ministry.
Yeah, that's great.
All right. Well, thanks, Elizabeth.
All
We'll
right.
be in
Thank you guys
touch.
so much. Okay, sounds good. Take
All
care.
righty.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.